Morning. Many of our college students will be headed back today, at least the ones that go to Harding, and we wish them Godspeed, God's blessing on this journey back and on the semester, and we'll look forward to those times that you can be back home. Some of our other students will be leaving later this next week, and I think I heard one or two say that they didn't have to go back until pretty late in January, so we'll get to see them for a few more days. How's your resolutions coming? I've been fascinated with this concept of ours that around the first of the year we're going to resolve some things. I heard one man say that he only had one resolution this year, and that was not to make any resolutions. I think he broke that with the resolution that he made. And I've tried resolutions. You've tried resolutions, probably. The Bible is read more from January the 1st to January the 3rd than at any other time of the year, and then the reading of the Bible just falls off the chart. I wonder why. I'm going to lose 622 pounds this year. And people do real well till about the 7th of the month. So yesterday you fell off the wagon, or I fell off the wagon. Why don't they work any better? And the problem might be that it's because we have developed a false premise. Our premise is not spiritually induced. Now, some people do make their resolutions based upon their spiritual commitment and their walk with the Lord. And I commend you for that. That's important and wonderful. But so often when we begin to go through this resolving process, we, as we tend to do, don't put God into the picture. We don't put our spiritual selves into the picture. And so consequently, we just go through this rote process that we do every year, knowing full well that we're going to break most of them before the first 10 days are gone out of the year. And then we retread that road at some other time. And they just don't work. Because we haven't acknowledged the source. We haven't realized that there's some fundamental disciplines, there's some fundamental spiritual principles that have to be in place for any of these sort of things to make a difference in our life. Now, you're going to wonder if this story really matches what I've started with, but it really kind of does. About 20 years ago or so, my mother gave Sue and I a Black & Decker toaster oven. Let me tell you, that was a fine toaster oven. It had a dial so that you could dial up whether you wanted it light or dark. It had a little switch on the side that you flip down, and that thing would toast your bread until it was just right according to the dial, what you had set on the dial, and that deal would flip up. Now, it so happens that we have a great controversy in our house about how toast should be. Sue likes it warmed. I like it almost burned. We finally got that dude adjusted to the point where You could pull that lever down and it would fix Sue's toast, and I'd put my bread in there and I'd pull that lever down, and then when it popped up, I'd pull that lever down, and when it popped up, I was ready. Toast was right. But can you imagine what a white toaster oven looks like after you've used it for 20 years? And we washed it pretty frequently. But the white kept getting dingier and dingier. And finally, it worked wonderfully well. Grab a hold of that point, because that's part of the message. It worked wonderfully well, but it looked horrible. Well, we're doing a little spiffying up in the kitchen, and so Sue says to me, or I say to her, I'm not sure which one, you know, a new toaster oven would look nice. And you know what? They come in black now. And she found one. And there was no doubt in our mind what we were going to buy. Black & Decker. Black toaster. And so with great pride, we put it on the cabinet. We plug it in. We put in a piece of toast. We turn it on and follow their instructions. And this is the result. And for 6 weeks now, this has been the result. Because no matter how far you turn it down on this knob, because they no longer have the little dilly-hoo that goes up and down that sets it, you can't get it right. We've only figured out one way to make our toast come out right, and that's to stand there in front of it and watch it, and the second that it gets about ready, take a fork and try not to burn your hand and pull it out. Of course, your egg's burned in the process. Our confidence was in the fact that we had owned a product that had really worked. And very seldom had we ever had burnt toast. We forgot to check the source when we bought the new Black & Decker. We forgot to go look, and does it still have one of those little squiggly things that sets the timer? Can you set the timer manually? Or do you have to get down there, and because it's black and with our eyes, we have to squint, to get there. And consequently, just like our resolutions, we frequently end up with burnt toast. And as I was pulling out this particular piece of burnt toast about 2 weeks ago, and I was standing there looking at it, I thought, this is what's wrong with resolutions. We don't spend enough time with the source. We abandon the basics. And Black & Decker, bless their hearts, they abandoned the basics that made their what once was a wonderful machine into one that, well, if I can ever get a contact address, I'm going to talk to the folks about returning this thing because I'm tired of burnt toast. Lamentations has a lot to do with burnt toast living. Lamentations has a lot to do with the fact that Jeremiah is struggling, oh, how he is struggling with his ability to communicate with God because of the spirit that has been crushed within him. And in spite of the fact that in Lamentations he tries to make resolve, it's only when he gets back to realizing where his source is, what is really necessary, what he really needs to have, does he get away from burnt toast living. You heard the verses a few moments ago, but I'd like to read them to you again. Listen to Jeremiah. My soul has been rejected from peace. I have forgotten happiness. So I say, my strength has perished, and so has my hope from the Lord. Remember my affliction and my wandering, the wormwood, the bitterness. Surely my soul remembers and is bowed down within me. He was living life with burnt toast every morning. He was living life with all of the frustrations, and no matter what the resolve he might have, no matter what the changes he might want to make, for some strange reason they weren't working. Jeremiah wasn't making any progress in his own heart and his own spirit. Just as many times you and I are not making progress in our own hearts and in our own spirit because we're just consumed with the burnt toast. We need to get back to the basics, with the switch that works and with the timer that works, with the things that make for the toast to come out edible in our life, if you follow the analogy. Well, that gets us to verse 21 and verse 22. And in verse 21 and verse 22, Jeremiah finally begins to realize how he can make the changes that he needs to make in his life, and it's not because he needs something new. It's because he needs to remember where the source of his abilities to overcome and to have abundance are. Listen carefully. This I recall to my mind. Therefore I have hope. The Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. I have actually talked to individuals who said, well, I made some resolutions around the first of the year, and by the second week, they were all history, and so I was going to wait again until January of next year and to make some more resolutions, and I'm going to be miserable all the time in between then. And I keep saying, wait a second. God doesn't intend for us to live that way. God doesn't want us to have a life of burnt toast day in and day out, because he gives us the abilities, if we will really use the foundational source, to be able to live life abundantly every day. You remember what Jesus said in John chapter 10 and verse 10, don't you? He's already talked about the thief that comes in to steal, to rob. The sheep listen to the voice of the shepherd. There's a key. The sheep listen to the voice of the shepherd. And he says, I came that they might have life, and that life more abundantly. And Jeremiah finally gets to that understanding in his life. Here's where the newness comes from. It's not with the resolutions that happen once a year. It's not with all of the other things that we listen to in this world that try to attract our attention and say, if you really want to be prosperous, you do this. If you want to really be powerful, do this. Jeremiah finally comes to that fundamental that really does make the difference. I have hope because the Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease. His compassions never fail. Reading this last week, I found a definition about God's faithfulness that I thought was pretty simple, but pretty definitive. God's faithfulness means that everything he says and does is absolute. God's faithfulness is everything that he says and everything that he does is absolute. And so when we have that foundation within our lives, an understanding that God is absolute in the things that he has said to us, then that gives us the discipline, the spiritual insight to overcome living our lives with burned resolutions, with the burnt toast. It's what gives us the power and the ability to say, okay, I can face today, even though today's going to be a difficult day. Why? Because the Lord's loving kindness indeed never ceases. Just out of curiosity, I began to look up the word faithful in my text in relationship to God, just to see what does the Bible say about God's faithfulness. Notice a few illustrations. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 24, faithful is he who calls you. 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 3, but the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen and protect you from the evil one. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 13, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 23, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. Why? For he who promised is faithful. 1 John chapter 1 and verse 9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. No wonder Jeremiah is so thankful that the Lord's loving kindness is there and that the Lord's faithfulness is there. And if we really want to make change in our life, we want to become something different than what we are right now, we come to the cross of Christ because of the faithfulness of God and because of the surety of the cross, and we begin to look and see that Jesus empowers us through his righteousness to become what we want to be. Now notice I said become because it's a process. It's not something that we're going to do every day. And all of this is predicated upon God's faithfulness. We know this, but why do we not practice it? We know this, but why don't we put our confidence and our trust in it? The Apostle Paul was on that ship. The ship was in the midst of storm. He has a vision from the Lord. You remember the story? He makes one statement there that I think ought to be the motto of every person when they're thinking about their relationship with God. Paul says that no loss of life is going to happen. And he says, I know this is true because I believe God. Now, I know in my heart of hearts that the majority of us sitting in this room today say to ourselves, oh yeah, Robert, I believe God. But yet when you begin to look at the way in which we live life and the way in which we practice the things that we do, the way in which we accomplish the tasks around us, sometimes we pretty well prove to ourselves and to the world, if we'll just look, that we believe God sometimes. We don't believe him all the time. We don't trust him entirely. Yeah, I know that that's what God says. I know that that's what Christ says. I know that that's what the apostles tell us. But, and anytime we put that hesitance there, it's problematic. God is faithful. God is faithful. We can trust him. We can trust him. I read a story this last week that came out of the earthquake in Armenia in 1988. And it was a story that moved me. I want to share it with you because I think it illustrates the point from a human perspective of the way in which God is faithful toward us. Samuel and Danielle sent their young son Armand off to school. Samuel squatted before his son and looked him in the eye. Have a good day at school. Remember, no matter what, I'll always be there for you. They hugged and the boy ran off to school. Hours later, a powerful earthquake rocked the area. In midst of the pandemonium, Samuel and Danielle tried to discover what happened to their son, but they couldn't get any information. The radio announced there were thousands of casualties. Samuel grabbed his coat, headed for the schoolyard. When he reached the area, what he saw brought tears to his eyes. Armand's school was a pile of debris. Other parents were standing around crying. Samuel found the place where Armand's classroom used to be and began pulling a broken beam off the pile of rubble. He then grabbed a rock and put it to the side and then grabbed another one. One of the parents looking on said, "What are you doing?" "Digging for my son," Samuel answered. The man said, "You're just going to make things worse. The building is unstable," and tried to pull Samuel away from his work. But Samuel set his jaw and kept working. As time wore on, one by one, the other parents left. Then the firefighter tried to pull Samuel away from the rubble. Samuel looked at him and said, "Won't you help me?" The firefighter left. Samuel kept digging. All through the night and into the next day, Samuel continued digging. Parents placed flowers and pictures for their children on the ruins, but Samuel kept digging. He picked up a beam and pushed it out of the way, and he heard a faint cry, "Help! Help!" Samuel listened but didn't hear anything again. Then he heard a muffled voice, "Papa?" Samuel began to dig furiously. Finally, he could see his son. "Come on out, son," he said with relief. "No," Armand said, "let the other kids come out first, because I know you'll get me." Child after child emerged until finally little Armand appeared. Samuel took him in his arms, and Armand said, "I told the other kids not to worry, because you told me that you'd always be there for me." 14 children were saved that day because one father was faithful. Earthly story, almost bring a tear to your eye. Maybe it brings a tear to your eye. And yet I'm here to declare to you that God is more faithful than this father was. That God is new every morning. And you and I, when we put our lives and put our confidence in Him instead of in our own intelligence, instead of our own pocketbooks, instead of our own will, instead of our own desires and our own wishes, when we put God in the forefront of our lives, we have a force that no matter what transpires in this world, no matter what happens, no matter what is the circumstance that we find ourselves in, He faithfully is there to overcome. And He's there, as Jeremiah says, new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I have hope in Him. New every morning. Apostle Paul had something significant to say along this line. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, we use the verses frequently. He says, "Don't lose heart. Though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory, far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Great is thy faithfulness, new every morning. Oh, how we need to make the Lord the portion of our life. Put our hope and put our trust in Him." Verse 25, "The Lord is good to those who wait for Him, to the person who seeks Him." I thought of the great statement made by the prophet Amos in chapter 5. "Seek the Lord, that you may live." Seek the Lord, that you may live. Well, let's try to tie this bundle together. I'm sure that Black & Decker thought that by making some of the changes that they made, they were making it new and improved. And they didn't. They made a pile of garbage. It burns the toast every morning. And I'm sure that we think when we don't put God into our plans that that's okay because God is going to take care of us no matter what. And we make resolutions that don't happen because we've forgotten the source. We've forgotten what really works. What really makes the difference. You want to overcome the burnt toast. Be like Jeremiah is in this passage, where he grabs a hold of the fresh start that he has every morning because he remembers the loving kindness of God. Because he puts his confidence in the Lord. You want to have a great year this year? It begins and it ends with, am I going to trust God and do what he says more than I trust anything else? And I can assure you it will be new for you every morning. And even though this may be the year that some of the worst tragedies could possibly happen to you, you'll be victorious. Because you've got your heart in the right spot. You've got your faith placed in the right personage, the deity, God, the hope of mankind. New every morning. I like that. And even though we have the aches and the pains and the difficulties of life that come our way, new every morning. That's our God. Do we trust him? We extend the invitation of Jesus this morning. We want you to put your faith and your trust in God. And maybe if you have not done so, you need to do so. He's given us his Son, Jesus Christ the righteous, that you and I might have hope because of his death upon the cross, his burial in the grave. The grave could not contain him. He was raised, now seated at the right hand of the throne of God, making intercession for those who are in him. If you need to become in him this morning, we want to give you that opportunity. Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Are you willing to confess that you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God in your life from this point throughout your life?